Good morning and welcome to Fall Convocation. Fall Convocation is a tradition at Gettysburg College that has gone on for nearly 30 years. This event brings speakers to our campus who are social activists, individuals who work to create positive social change. Over the years, our speakers have stretched our thinking, challenged our assumptions, and inspired us to think and act differently. We expect Gettysburgians to seek solutions to difficult social problems, to provide service to those in need, and to champion social justice issues. And we have a great legacy of that among our alumni. Just to give you a couple of examples, Carol Bellamy, class of 1963, is former director of the Peace Corps and UNICEF, and former president and CEO of World Learning, which is a nonprofit organization that operates in more than 70 countries to foster global citizenship. Bruce Gordon, class of 1968, served as president of the NAACP. Catherine Walford, class of 1979, is former president of Lutheran World Relief and is currently president of the McKnight Foundation. Or more recent graduates, Luisa Polos, class of 2008, founded Campus Kitchens here in Gettysburg, which, as many of you know, has reclaimed thousands of pounds of food that would have been discarded and turned it into thousands of meals to close the food gap in Adams County. John Jordan, class of 2009, is the national coordinator for the Rural HIV Alliance in Honduras. Becky Brown, class of 2010, is a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador. Megan Crow, class of 2010, is a No Kid Hungry field coordinator, working to create public-private partnerships in cities and states across the country to end childhood hunger. Carter McClintock, class of 2012, is working in the AmeriCorps Vista program in Massachusetts, training and supporting tutors for K-12 students and supporting an after-school program. These alumni and so many others whom I could have mentioned exemplify Gettysburgians who are out there providing support where needed and trying to generate solutions to complex social issues. In short, they are working to make the world a better place. This morning, we continue our tradition of bringing social activists to campus for convocation. We are very honored to have with us Ralph Nader, who has dedicated his life to organizing and inspiring people to generate solutions to complex social problems, and I am certain that he will inspire many of you. So once again, welcome, and now I'd like to introduce Chaplain Danella, who will deliver today's invocation.
Good morning. I'd like, if you can, to have you rise for a moment. And before I actually offer the invocation, I wanted to take a moment in silence to remember someone who, in fact, means a lot to me, the music of Dave Brubeck, who died yesterday, was sort of the theme of my youth. We heard it every Sunday afternoon in my family. Dave is a grandparent of a Gettysburg College student from the class of '03 and an honorary doctorate person from the college. So could we, for about 20 seconds, be still? Thank you. Let us pray. We are yearning, all of us. We are yearning, waiting, hoping for that something more that we cannot name. Kindle in us flames of understanding, justice, and peace, that we might share the blessings of learning and deliverance. Help us to not transgress against each other, nor to become so immersed in the pursuit of material gain or worldly pleasure that we forsake paths of goodness and right. Bless this day, this time, this gathering. May we continue to do what affirms the oneness of all humanity as we seek new understanding and new light. Blessed are you, God of all creation. May the light of your kindness shine on us as we strive with courage to do your will. Blessed are you forever. Amen. You may be seated.
Everyone, my name is Phil Zickball, and I'm a first-year student studying health sciences and writing.
And I'm Josh Rubenstein, and I am also a first-year student studying psychology and mathematics.
We are here today as members of the 2012 Fall Convocation Committee to present this year's Silent Leader Award. This year, we received over 40 nominations for the Silent Leader Award, and that's a great thing. Gettysburg College students as a whole are actively engaged in many issues both within and outside of the campus community.
There are so many student-run service organizations and advocate groups here on campus that it is not uncommon to see students gathering to discuss a common cause. That said, it came as no surprise that selecting one recipient for the award was a difficult task.
So what exactly makes a silent leader? A silent leader is one who positively impacts the lives of people through selfless leadership and through their dedication to enacting meaningful change.
They actively challenge ideological and societal constructions and seek to promote equality across all classifications in their work and in their lives. As the name suggests, this person leads by example through hard work and a caring attitude.
Today, we want to take the time to recognize a woman who embodies these traits and more. She is a junior who is a quiet yet strong force on campus. She is a double major in environmental studies and anthropology and is an amazing mentor and role model for first-year students.
She's an active member of the Peace and Justice Club, leading discussions on issues of social justice on campus and beyond. She also serves as a peer learning associate for a first-year seminar, organizing activities for meaningful involvement in the community and inspiring the students to think outside their boxes of social privilege towards a more equitable sense of justice.
Those who nominated this silent leader describe her as a responsible, responsive, and proactive person who shows a level of awareness that is humbling and inspiring, both in her discussions of readings and in her interactions with people who differ from herself. She truly exhibits the qualities and more of a silent leader, but she requires no attention. Having said this, please join us in congratulating Natasha Yulberg.
Natasha, could you please come to the stage?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Jones, class of 2015. It is my honor to present the Faculty Award for Community-Based Engagement. This is the first year that this award is being presented. As students, learning comes alive when we are able to connect theory to real-life applications. Therefore, we are starting a new Fall Convocation tradition of honoring faculty members who are able to integrate community-based learning into our academic work, engaging us and exploration of social justice and course concepts in a meaningful and transformative way. The inclusion of community-based learning brings excitement to the classroom, a deeper level of intellectual engagement, and makes us want to go out and change the world. This year, the entire student body was asked to nominate members of the faculty who best provided this type of teaching and learning. While many were nominated, we are here to recognize only one. This professor came to Gettysburg College 2 years ago with a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, a Master in Education, a Master of Science in Curriculum and Instruction, a Doctor of Education in Curriculum and Teaching. She teaches multiple courses that examine education, citizenship, inequality, migration, and culture. Her students are required to become involved in educational initiatives in the Gettysburg community, and she connects the course topics to what her students are experiencing. In the nomination, one student shares, "Through this experience, I was able to better understand how immigrants themselves feel about immigration policy, and now I can better empathize with their experiences. I have never put so much thought into reflections as I did for this class." Her passion is inspiring, and she is dedicated to making the service component of the class positive for her students and partner organizations in the community. As a result, we would like to present the first 2012 Faculty Award for Community-Based Engagement to Kaoru Miyazawa, also known as Mia, the Assistant Professor of Education.
America is not the greatest country in the world. Take a moment, think about it. Don't just throw that away. America is not the greatest country in the world. You might have heard it before, but what does that mean to you? The first step to solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world, but it can be. This country was founded with the intent to be the greatest in the world. Millions of people have worked, fought, and died for this goal. What was it that made us dream we could build the greatest country the world has ever seen? What made us capable of working individually for our own success, yet holding on to that collective hope for the future? Liberty. Henry Ward Beecher once said, "Liberty is the soul's right to breathe." It is that most precious of commodities and that unalienable right which endows all others. Without a free and safe society, no person can realize their true potential in the world. In the wake of Hurricane Sandy and the nor'easter that hit New York, our original speaker, Anthony Romero, was unable to make it to Gettysburg. In his stead, I have the great honor to present Ralph Nader, a self-described public citizen who has achieved a phenomenal level of national prominence. Honored by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century, and by The Atlantic as one of the 100 most influential figures in American history, consumer advocate and Green Party presidential candidate Ralph Nader has devoted his life to giving ordinary people the tools they need to defend themselves against injustice, corporate negligence, and governmental indifference. With a tireless and selfless dedication, he continues to expose problems and organize millions of citizens to advocate for solutions to put people back in charge of America's democracy. Working with lawmakers, he has been instrumental in creating the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Laws he helped draft and pass include the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Meat and Poultry Inspection Rules, and the Air and Water Pollution Control Laws, as well as the Freedom of Information Act. Working to empower the average American, Mr. Nader has formed numerous citizen groups, including the Center for Auto Safety, Public Citizen, the Pension Rights Center, and the National Coalition for Universities in the Public Interest. In his latest citizen initiative, he is working with alumni classes, including his own, at Princeton University and Harvard Law School, to expand their efforts beyond parties and reunions to community projects that systematically advance social justice. I am excited to welcome advocate, lawyer, and author, Mr. Ralph Nader, to, as the title of his new book encourages, Get Steamed to create change on this campus and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ralph Nader.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was a very realistic beginning. It might have startled you, but if we don't confront reality, we'll never be able to change it. We'll be in a delusionary state. I want to thank the honorees here, and of course all the students and faculty and administration who worked to make this convocation possible, in spite of the weather back a few days ago. I think I'm obligated a bit to inform you how I came to do what I was doing. And this was encouraged because in the description that I was given of you, there's this quote. This is about you. There are no bystanders here. The students prepare for leadership through experiential learning opportunities, an extensive career network, and countless co-curricular service and off-campus study activities, end quote. I hope that includes more than just charity. Charitable activities, working at soup kitchens, very important for people in need, but that's addressing symptoms. There's a distinction between charity and justice. And justice deals with causes. It deals with prevention. And in discussing what kind of career you want to pursue or what kind of work you want to do in your spare time, it's always important to distinguish whether you're going to work on charity or justice. Far more people work on charity, and doesn't seem to be any end to the need. And far fewer people work on justice. In a rich country like ours, we should not have 15 million children going to sleep hungry every night, or the rampant hunger that's increasing all over the country. There'll never be enough soup kitchens for that. We have to deal with prevention, reorder power in this country so that the few do not have so much power over the many. When I was your age, I lost a lot of friends in traffic crashes. It was a common occurrence, a crash, an injury, a death. The fatality rate was 5 times higher than it is today. We've made great progress with better highways, safer cars, cracking down on drunk driving, but the big factor was seat belts and other long overdue features in your car that you now take for granted, but which we had to fight the auto industry device by device, whether it was padded dash panels, collapsing steering columns, better brakes, better handling, better tires, head restraints, seat belts, airbags, breakaway rear view mirror. Every one of these had to be wrung out of a stubborn executive core at the heads of General Motors, Ford, Chrysler in the 60s and early 70s. One would think they would want to go down in history as being remembered for saving lives and preventing injuries. It was the first cause of death in your age group, death on the highway. But they had other priorities, very narrow, parochial, materialistic, profit priorities that made sure that all the scientists and engineers they had in their company were not working on important matters like pollution control, crash safety, and other features of the motor vehicle that have taken so long to improve. They were working, and a lot of others were working on style and horsepower. It was style and horsepower. Well, I began looking into this, and I was quite astonished at what I found, namely that the engineers in these companies knew how to build cars, that it wasn't expensive, that it was quickly amortized, and indeed, they saved a lot of their customers when they had safer cars from death and injury. And that got me angry. That's why I first learned that there were a lot of people in and outside the auto companies who knew what needed to be done. They knew. There was no secret, especially with things like seatbelts. The first seatbelts were used in World War I planes to keep the pilots from falling out of the planes. There was no secret. But what a lot of them didn't have was fire in their belly. They didn't have emotional intelligence. You can know all about an injustice in your brain, but if you don't have emotional intelligence, if you don't have fire in your belly to do something about it, it's not going to be applied. And that's what I think a 14th century Chinese philosopher meant when he gave us that wonderful dicta, which when you hear it, you'll never forget. And what he said was, to know and not to do is not to know. To know and not to do is not to know. And if you look back in American history, a lot of people knew what Rosa Parks knew. A lot of people knew what the organizers of the United Auto Workers knew. A lot of people knew about migrant workers. A lot of people knew about denying women the right to vote. A lot of people knew about slavery. A lot of people knew about the horrendous deaths in these dangerous factories in the early Industrial Revolution. But only a few had fire in their belly to change their daily routine and do something about it. And that's what you need to ponder in the months and years ahead. We have far more knowledge about how to improve this world of ours than we are applying. We don't know how to clean up drinking water that takes over 1 million children's lives a year around the world? Of course we do. We don't know how to feed people and keep famine and malnourished millions and millions of people from dying or getting sick? Of course we do. We don't know how to deal with tuberculosis that kills 3 million people a year? Well, we abolished it in this country virtually in the 1950s. But it's still killing as many people this year as it killed 10 years ago. Knowledge to action. That leap comes from putting your value systems between what you know and what you emotionally feel compelled to do with what you know. Here we are in Gettysburg, of course, and one of Lincoln's famous comments was, we have to think anew when there are new conditions and new challenges. Think anew. And that's what I want to cover today. But first, a little bit of warm-up. I want to give you 3 quick stories and emphasize why I'm doing it. Albert Einstein once was quoted as saying, quote, "I have no special gifts. I only have a passionate curiosity." Emphasize the word curiosity. Isaac Newton was asked once at a gathering, "Mr. Newton, why are you so much more brilliant than your fellow scientists?" Mr. Newton responded, "I'm not so much more brilliant than my fellow scientists. I just happen to be able to keep a problem in my mind and concentrate on it longer than most of them." Pluck the word concentration. And William Blake, pretty fascinating literary figure in England a couple of centuries ago, he was asked at a party, "Mr. Blake, with whom are you living these days?" And he said, "With whom am I living? I'm living with my imagination." Pluck the word imagination. Curiosity, concentration, imagination. We all have to work on that. If we go through life, as too many people do, without curiosity, they don't show up at town meetings. They don't show up at marches. They don't open books that they would otherwise open and read. Too many people go through life without concentration. They have short attention spans, a serious problem in your generation, the Twitter generation, the text message generation, the generation that walks day after day looking down at their hand and the gadget. You don't have imagination, you can't envision new possibilities. If you can't envision new possibilities, how are you going to try to work for them? After World War II, Western Europe was totally destroyed. So was Eastern Europe. Western Europe was destroyed. Massive poverty, unemployment, sickness, destitute countryside, blown up cities. And they got themselves together. At the same time, we were #1 in the world in power, military, political, economic, almost untouched in terms of a devastated society. Lost a lot of soldiers. Look at the difference in expectation levels. In Western Europe, through their trade unions, their multiple party system, not just two-party system, not just two-party tyranny, through their cooperatives, here's what they got. For all their people, which we do not have today in the land of the free, home of the brave. Here's what they got. They got stronger labor laws. They got universal health insurance. They got tuition-free higher education. They got decent, inexpensive public transit. They got paid daycare, paid maternity care, paid family sick leave. They got 4 weeks paid vacation, at least. They got better retirement. And they got higher pay. That is, the lower 1/3 of workers in Europe are doing better than in this country. We have the lowest minimum wage in the large industrial nations of the Western world. Today, over 60 years after World War II, we do not have any of these for all the people. Some unions may have this and that. We don't have it. So nobody dies in France, Italy, Germany, Canada, Luxembourg, Great Britain because they don't have health insurance. In this country, 800 Americans a week, according to Harvard research, die because they cannot afford health insurance to get diagnosed and treated in time. And if 45,000 people die every year, imagine how many continue to stay sick and injured because they can't afford health care. This phenomena is not even on the table in our political system. The major candidates don't touch it, they don't describe it, they don't talk about it, and obviously they don't want to do anything about it. And it goes on every day. The very styles of violence that we talk about are shaped by corporate power and their political influence. Therefore, there's plenty to talk about terrorism, which is now a huge industry. It has spawned not a war on terror, just a war of terror against people who happen to live in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. But how many of you have heard about this? 58,000 Americans die in this country from workplace-related diseases and trauma. That's OSHA figures. Off the table. Not even an issue between the two parties. How many of you have heard of this? Over 200,000 people die from hospital malpractice, medical errors, and hospital-induced infections. That's 4,000 a week. Not even on the table. Not part of our political dialogue. Therefore, not on the screen. How many of you heard of this? EPA figures. 65,000 Americans die every year from air pollution. Hardly on the table. All these are preventable by a deliberative democracy that distributes power in accordance with the needs of justice and health and safety. Does this upset you? If you believe these figures, does this upset you? If it does not upset you, you are normatively deprived, and you've got to work on it. You've got a problem. Does it upset you that half of the people in this country live in poverty? You say, what do you mean half? It couldn't be that high. Well, the definition of poverty in this country by the Department of Labor is the following. If you have a family of 4 and you make over $23,000 a year gross before deductions, you are not poor. But some economic analysts basically say that if you have a family of 4, unless you make over $40,000 minus deductions, you are poor. And that cutoff of about $40,000 for a family of 4 is almost half the households in America. The top 1% of the richest people in this country, who together with their corporate structures influence Washington to make them ever richer through corporate welfare, subsidies, handouts, giveaways, tax loopholes, they have as much financial wealth as the bottom 95% of the American people. Does that upset you? Does that get you a little bit indignant? Does that light a fire in your belly? If it does, then you're going to get more out of your education here. If it doesn't, then the education you get is going to obstruct your intellectual and normative development, no matter what grades you get. Students in the 60s have been described as activists. Well, I think about 5% of them were. But that's all it took, because they represented the public sentiments of a lot of other students on campus. In April 1970, they launched Earth Day. It was heavily student-led, even though Senator Gaylord Nelson and others proposed it. There were 1,500 events all over the country, probably here too, at the college. In that following week, 20 million people were at various teach-ins and marches around the country. That so shook Richard Nixon that he signed into law some of the major environmental bills that came to him from Congress. He was afraid of the rumble of the people. Now, how much rumble was it? How much time did those 20 million people spend compared to the way they spend other time, day after day? We missed the big lesson here. The big lesson is it's a lot easier than we think to make major turnarounds in our country. You think the people in Western Europe took out months and months to get what I described that they got? No. They just moved with enough pressure from the grassroots through their institutions at the right time. And when they got universal health care, they didn't have to get it every year. No politician dared take it away from them. In the 60s, the students, a few of them, were on the ramparts for civil rights. African Americans, Hispanic Americans were not being treated properly. They were being excluded, denied, disrespected. The students were on the ramparts leading the way on environmental explorations. They began defining environmental pollution as a silent cumulative form of violence, not just something dirty and ugly to look at. They were certainly on the ramparts against the war in Vietnam. They helped launch the latest installment of the women's movement, and they began talking about student rights. Not a bad menu. Some of them wrote papers and took seminars in these areas, and they made a difference. One reason is there was a draft. They had skin in the game. They didn't want to be taken to Vietnam. If you're part of the risk, you're going to be part of the solution. The problem is that our rulers, corporate and governmental, and they're very close with one another. We have a corporate government. Our rulers don't have much skin in the game. They can, in effect, say from Congress, well, we're not going to fulfill our constitutional duties of declaring war. We'll just let George Bush and Dick Cheney decide whether to invade Iraq in 2003. And that criminal war of aggression, stated as such by leaders of the UN and others, took 1 million Iraqi lives or more and turned that country into a sociocide situation. 4,500, 5,000 of our soldiers, 100,000 traumatized for a long time or sick. What happened to Congress for violating its own constitution? Nothing. They only had 3 children in the armed services. 3. That's one less than the sons of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who were in World War II. The entire Congress, 535 people. They had no skin in the game. Mr. Bush, Mr. Cheney, they're going around making big money, speeches, getting awards. These are clinically war criminals. They violated our Constitution. They violated federal statutes. They engaged in torture. They arrested thousands of people, threw them in jail without charges, denying them due process and habeas corpus. They violated international treaties that we helped launch and sign, the Geneva Convention. These are above the law, beyond the law. They're immune. They don't have skin in the game. There are 3 questions you should ask people in power, whether they're corporate or government or otherwise. When they make statements, you become a great reporter if you just know these 3 questions. 1, where's your evidence? Do you know how infrequent the White House press corps asks presidents and press secretaries that question? Or John Boehner, or Eric Cantor, or Senator McConnell, or Leader Pelosi, or Majority Leader Reid? What's your evidence for what you're saying? The second question is, what's your legal authority for what you're doing? And the third question is, do you have skin in the game? When these Wall Streeters tell you to buy certain stock, they tell pension funds and mutual funds to buy certain stock, and they're selling it on the side, or they don't have skin in the game, why should you believe them? There's a brand new book out by Nasib Talib. He's the author of Black Swan. How many of you have ever heard of Black Swan, that book? Young people have told me it's really changed their whole way they look at probability. Well, he's just out with a book called Anti-Fragile, and he talks about skin in the game. This is a remarkable book in the sense that you can pick it up and open it in any page and you'll be intrigued. He's a Renaissance man. Skin in the game. Now let's go through an exercise here. Let's say that you want to be leaders in the advancement of justice. I mean, it isn't fun going through life being a follower. The purpose of leadership is to build more leaders, and they can be graphic arts, they can be musicians, they can be politicals, they can be business leaders. But let's say you have a high estimate of your own significance. You're not going to trivialize your life. You're not going to get a terrific skill and go into a company and be told to engage in trivial activities like developing a complex formula for a new artificial whip for a donut or a cupcake. People get prizes for that. Chemists. Can you imagine looking back at age 80 and, hey, grandchild, hey, grandma, granddaddy, what did you do in life? Well, I created a whip, an artificial whip for a cupcake. Sold billions of cupcakes. Or I created a terrific ad that deceived people into spending billions of dollars. Avoid trivia. So you want to be significant. Okay? So let's say someone said to you, you want to improve this country? And you say, yeah. You say, all right, how about this for an exercise? You got 5 hours. Somebody says, there are $15 billion available for you. There are 17 elderly, super rich billionaires who want to do good that are going to give you that 15 billion. And they're asking you, how would you change the country and how many ways, when, where, how, by who, for who, in 1 year? Would you know how to spend it? Would you know how to spend the influence of these 17 billionaires who come from all kinds of backgrounds, business backgrounds, legal backgrounds, media backgrounds, artistic backgrounds? Would you know how to spend it? You know, I've asked students that. It is absolutely the greatest message on the deficiencies of our education, even if you major in political science, to see how absolutely pathetic and amateurish the responses are. And you know why? Because we grow up corporate. We don't grow up to imagine real possibilities that are within the range of our capabilities, of our intelligence, of our resources, of our past achievers in our history. We grow up trivialized and commercialized. I'll give you an example. How many of you have never been to a shopping mall? How many of you have never been to a McDonald's? How many of you have never been to a Walmart? Are you from a foreign country? Okay. How many of you have never been to a Starbucks? They haven't got full saturation. Do you realize this is almost 100% saturation? All right, so you want to buy things, so you go to the stores. You want to eat, you go to the stores. It's understandable, apart from what your choices may be. Okay, now let's shift the venue. How many of you have never been to a court of law as a spectator? Any court of law? Look at the hands. How many of you have never been to a town meeting as a participant? Look at the hands. How many of you have never visited a prison as a visitor? Okay. Who's keeping you from doing that? You see how we grow up commercial? We grow up corporate. And of course, these are the arenas where decisions are made that affect you. They affect you very seriously, especially if you call Congress a town meeting and the federal courts are involved. There's no time to lose. You are now citizens not in waiting. You are citizens that can engage. And I'm going to suggest ways that you can change things while you are students. See? Don't just keep yourself in a state of preparation, someday. In the 60s, the students made tremendous changes. They put forces in motion with a fraction of their time and energy. It's a lot easier than you think. You got 15,000 days, or give or take, before you turn 65. A little over 2,000 weeks. Did last week go quickly? You haven't seen anything yet. Ask your parents and grandparents how fast it goes. It turns out you're heading into your most creative decade, your 20s, and not just for science and mathematics. It's in your 20s that you decide what's important, what you want to do in life, what you don't have to be forced to do. And you happen to have high imaginative levels. You ask impertinent questions. I mean, look at the conventional software creators. I mean, they're all very young. Not that they're creating really important software. They're going into a vortex of trivia with all their apps. But that's where the imagination is. So don't waste it. I mean, don't go through your 20s trying to overcome personal problems that you should have taken care of when you were teenagers. And when someone asks me what's the biggest obstacle to advancement of the good life and happiness and the pursuit of happiness and justice, it's people overcome by personal problems. And some of them are inescapable. You have accidents. You have illness. But a lot of them are preventable or submersible if you commit yourself to something more important. If you're on a mission to tackle some horrible injustice, you're going to spend less time thinking about your smaller personal problems. You're going to have a bigger frame of reference. So back to the 15 billion and 17 super rich people in their 70s, 80s, 90s. They're at your service. How would you change the country? Well, let's start with a quick list, not meant to depress you, of some of the problems in this country. I mentioned poverty. I mentioned lack of health insurance. How about corporate crime? Corporate crime is such a widespread, controversial issue that until recently it wasn't even taught in law schools. They called it white-collar crime. You know, the bank teller stealing from the bank, not the bank stealing from the customers. If you doubt the prevalence of corporate crime, just read the Wall Street Journal. They report it all the time. USA Today. Look at 60 Minutes. It's far more reported than we have enforcement budgets to do something about it, or political will by the two parties to do something about it, because they're dialing for the same commercial dollars from these corporate crooks. And what does it do? It depreciates your income by fraud. It fixes prices, corners markets, deceives people, sells people drugs that don't work or have harmful side effects. Endless stuff's reported that you can have access to right on the internet. How about public budgets? Did you know that 1/2 of the federal government's operating expenditure is military? For who? Who's the major enemy that takes half of the federal government's operating expenditure? The Pentagon budget is about $800 billion, and then there's ancillary budgets over at Department of Energy, Department of State, not counting the Veterans Administration, not counting the interest on debts from past wars. Who's the enemy? There's no more Soviet Union. Communist China? They're too busy getting our industries and jobs. You think they're going to lob missiles over here and commit suicide? It was President Eisenhower in his great speech in January 1961 who warned about the military-industrial complex and what it can do to this country if we are not vigilant. That means Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon. Enough is never enough in terms of weapon development for these people. There is an industrial engineer in New York who once calculated we had enough TNT equivalent weapons to blow up the earth 300 times and make the rubble bounce. Did you know that one Trident submarine with multiple nuclear warheads in less than an hour can blow up 200 cities? And we have a lot of submarines. I urge you to read his speech again on the internet. He also gave another speech in April of 1953 before the editors and publishers in Washington, D.C. It was called the Cross of Iron speech. And he said, you know, we can destroy the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union can destroy us. Is this the way to live? And then he did what no president since has done. He listed how much a bomber, destroyer, submarine, etc. cost and translated it into clinics, schools, public transit. It's called the Cross of Iron speech. It is quite remarkable, isn't it, that a five-star general was the last president to convey these messages? You think you'd ever hear a president, Clinton, Bush, Obama, talk about the military-industrial complex, which is cannibalizing our country, militarizing our country, militarizing research on campuses in these big universities? Student debt, how about that one? Did you know that student debt exceeds credit card outstanding debt? It's over $1 trillion. There's no student debt in Western Europe. It's like high school. People get something for their taxes. The reason why there's such a tax revolt in this country is people go around and say, what are we getting for the taxes? Are we getting universal health care? No. Are we getting decent public transit? No. Are we getting tuition-free education? No. That's why there's more resistance in this country. It's not the kind of resistance that overwhelms and changes our tax code, which is another serious problem, as many of you know. How about the environment? How about this one? The Democrats have backed off on global warming dialogue in Washington. How do I know? Because there's a Republican senator, Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma, who thinks that climate change and global warming is the biggest hoax of the century. And he taunts the Democrats to debate him, and no Democrat is willing so far in Congress to debate him, including Ed Markey, who claimed to me that he wants to debate him. But somehow for a year, he couldn't find time to debate Jim Inhofe. That's how powerful the fossil fuel industry is. That's how powerful these interests are. There's something that is threatening the ecology and climate of the world is now hardly discussed in Washington. Even now, when you have a climate change conference in Doha this week. Civil liberties, you would have heard a lot from Tony Romero on that. And that is not just freedom to speak out. That is freedom to get due process of law, That's freedom from arbitrary government affliction. That is your own privacy. The more they know about you, the more they can control you. We have deficits. Deficits mean we have to pay a lot of interest on the debt, which can go to daily improvement of living. Well, you know a lot of this, so these are some of the problems that we would have to deal with in this $15 billion exercise. And you might start with a few definitions. The best definition of freedom I've ever heard was by Marcus Cicero over 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome. He said, freedom is participation in power. Do you participate in power? How many Americans participate in power? Government power, corporate power, even union power. How many? Did we participate in the decision to go to war? Do we have anything to say about who we blow up around the world? Do we have adequate choice on the ballots between, apart from the Republican, Democrat, increasingly converging? If we don't have choice of candidates, how much is our vote worth? If we don't have choice of candidate, we have to vote for the least worst. And if we vote for the least worst, we lose our bargaining power over our least worst choice. Because the least worst candidate knows we got nowhere to go. Because the other guy's worse. And so every 4 years, the corporations are pulling on both parties. Every 4 years, they become more and more remote from our needs and our justice. We have to do something about this two-party tyranny that no Western country is afflicted by to such a degree. It's easier than you think. Is that something you can learn to believe in? Have you heard of the Occupy Wall Street, 99%, 1%? There's another 1%. 1% of the American people distributed in congressional districts in Congress watchdog groups representing the public sentiment of a majority for all these redirections can turn the country around. That's 3 million people, give or take. The Congress watchdog groups, every congressional district has 650,000 men, women, children. So you get a couple thousand people, get together, connect with other congressional districts, put forth the agenda of change, full Medicare for all, we're going to change the tax system, we're going to reallocate public budgets, we're going to rebuild our public facilities, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, that's long overdue, no big deal, we've earned it, we deserve it, we need it for our children and grandchildren. You 535 members of Congress are going to shape up, or we're going to ship you out. Now, 2,000 Congress watchers devoting 200 volunteer hours each a year, putting $200 in a kitty to have full-time offices with full-time people, and you still are less in resources and time than the bird watchers of America. Is that too much to ask? That we have Congress watchers that spend less time watching Congress than bird watchers? I have nothing against bird watchers. I'm just trying to give you a proportion of how little it takes. And anybody who tells you this country is polarized, that's a controlling process by the oligarchs and the plutocrats. Because they define the way they ask the question. This country is not polarized on the major redirections of our nation. There are majoritarian positions on one after the other. There's a reason why bringing the minimum wage up to what it was in 1960 1968. Can you imagine? You're living in a time when 30 million workers make less in inflation-adjusted minimum wage than workers made 44 years ago. This country's in decay and decline. And what do you think meeting that level, which would be $10 an hour instead of $7.25, what do you think that comes in on the polls? Even without advocacy, it comes in over 70%. A lot of conservatives in that 70%. So don't let them tell you we're too polarized. We may be polarized over pro-choice, pro-life, NRA, anti-NRA, but in the major redirections in other areas, there is an incredible consensus. So when you are on this campus and you're talking to one another between classes, what do you talk about? What's the small talk on campus? What if you had 5 of your students in a little cluster and you were just talking? And one of your students interrupted and said, oh, here's Josephine Small. She's an extremely skilled citizen. You know, the other 4 students sort of returned to the small talk. 20 seconds later, the same student breaks up the small talk and says, here comes Joe Sesko. He's an extremely skilled consumer. Pretty soon, you know, the students are looking at this person. What's going on here? And they resume the small talk. And 20 seconds later, interrupts and says, oh, here's Joshi Fiddlesticks. She's a really demanding taxpayer. By this time, their eyes are rolling. How do you describe yourselves? Do you describe yourselves as good dressers, good athletes, friendly people? How do you describe each other? How you describe each other is reflected in what you expect of each other and how you define significance. And one of the ways to get moving on this type of course is just to give yourselves these kinds of exercises. Can you write a 1,000-word essay on your academic skills? Sure. Can you write a 1,000-word essay on your athletic skills, such as they are? Sure. Can you write a 1,000-word essay on your civic skills? Shouldn't every university have at least one course on civic skills and experience? In some places it's called experiential learning. John Dewey called it learning by doing. If we don't have courses on civic skills and civic experience, weaving together the humanities, social sciences, and the physical sciences, what are you going to learn when you graduate when the chips are down? When you're confronting terrible situations that affect you personally? Why do we have so many computer skill courses and almost no civic skill courses in campuses around the country? Is it too hard to teach? No. Does it require new buildings? No. Does it require terrifically expensive equipment? No. It just requires redefining education. As if democracy and its practice matter. And in these kinds of courses, you learn how not to grow up corporate. We all grew up corporate. Show me anybody who doesn't grow up corporate in this country, I'll show you a visiting Martian. We're watching tens of thousands of ads from when we were 3 years old. We got corporate logos imprinted on our brain. For decades, people were taught to look at cars in terms of speed, power, style, not in terms of safety, fuel efficiency, pollution control. And when we finally began to look at those three categories, things changed. Our expectation levels told Detroit, enough is enough. We're not going to keep buying these psychosexual dreamboats anymore, made up of junk engineering, gas-guzzling monsters. Growing up corporate means you don't even know what you own. Make a list of everything you own and see if you add the following. We own 1/3 of America, the public lands. We own the public airwaves, over which the radio and TV stations broadcast free 24 hours a day. They tell us who gets on and who doesn't. And we're the landlords, and they're the tenants, and they pay us nothing. We don't even have a student network, radio, TV. Over the decades, we gave it away. Do you know any major industry in this country that wasn't created by socialism? You think it was created by capitalism? How about trillions of dollars of government research and development to the drug industry, to the aerospace industry, to the semiconductor industry, to the biotech industry, to the containerization industry? They poured out of the Navy, Air Force, National Institutes of Health, NASA, for which the taxpayer gets no credit. I once wrote to top executives of 100 corporations, I said, why don't you designate April 15th Taxpayer Appreciation Day? Because you've been on welfare for years, corporate welfare. We don't even think of it. What do we get for all this? We get gouged. There's a woman who wrote me in 2000, and she said she was dying from ovarian cancer. And she had to leave her $18,000 a year job. She didn't have any health insurance. She went to the doctor. He said, all I can prescribe is Taxol. And she says, how much? And he says, $14,000 for 6 treatments. And we can't guarantee anything. It turns out Taxol was discovered with your tax money through the National Cancer Institute, $32 million. It was tested by your tax money and then given away free with no royalties to Bristol Myers Squibb. Promptly charged that much money. You see what happens when we grow up corporate? We don't see reality. We're afflicted with illusions and delusions and propaganda. The best way to show your friends how they grow up corporate is just to ask them this question. What do you think of in your mind when I say the following words? Crime, regulation, welfare. Crime, regulation, welfare, and violence. Well, usually you think of, crime in the streets, violence, burglaries, arson, rape, war. You think of welfare, people lined up for their welfare checks. You think of regulation, government regulation, and you're right. But you're not right quantitatively, because there's far more corporate crime, corporate violence. Just think pollution, occupational disease, etc. There's far more corporate regulation of your lives. Far more than what comes into our mind when we hear those words. That's what happens when we grow up corporate. We don't face those realities coming from preventable corporate activity, whether it is negligence, greed, mistakes, errors, or outright criminal behavior. Let me conclude on this. Here's what we can do on campus. And it's very, very precise. If you don't have civic skill and experience courses, start them. I think your faculty and deans would be delighted to get that interest from you. If you don't get them as part of the formal curriculum, start them as part of your extracurricular activity. For all I know, you may have this now. There's terrific materials in pursuing this, both specific, like how to put on a news conference, how to do a voting record and diffuse it through the congressional district, how to use the Freedom of Information Act, all the way to the psychological advances, which we call the civic personality. How not to be discouraged, how not to burn out, how to be resilient, how to share credit, how to build democratic movements. Number two, you have a course called Congress 101, where every semester the students monitor the contemporary daily activity of their senators and representatives in Washington or Harrisburg. You will see from that course how you can build power out of sheer knowledge and the ability to diffuse it to other citizens. So when you say, I don't have any power, how can I make a difference? I don't have any big wealth. The answer, here's how you can build power from sheer knowledge. I guarantee you, you'll get the attention of those legislators. Number three, you take your physics, chemistry, and biology labs, and if you don't do it already, you engage in such things as periodic testing of drinking water for heavy metals, like cadmium and lead, diffuse it to the community. Chemistry, biology, you do soil samples, endless amount of citizen science that can contribute to changing science and technology from being for armaments and for the few to science and technology for the people. If you do this, you'll develop a kind of elan as a class. Now, you are now being formed into a class, which will become an alumni class. I know when I was at Princeton, they really worked at it. They made you adhere, class of 55, class of 56. And it took 30 years before our classmates decided that they weren't just going to go back to reunions and be asked to give money, patted on the head, that they were going to organize a nonprofit group that would put hundreds of Princeton students in citizen action internships and fellowships year after year all over the country and now around the world. And that was our class, Princeton Project 55. It was a lot of fun. We got reacquainted. There was almost every conceivable talent, in a college class: lawyers, scientists, business, arts, media, etc. And I want you to start thinking about that, because that's one of the greatest unused resources in our country. Thousands and thousands of alumni classes coming back for reunion, getting drunk, remembering the class song, writing a few checks, going to a few workshops, and then forgotten. But there aren't many groups that you're going to belong to at age 17 and 18 where you can stay together and you don't have to flim-flam each other. You can be very candid with one another because you've known each other from a very young age. So I hope you think of all these things, and you remember above all that it's a lot easier than you think. And the books out there are designed to elaborate what I'm saying, and I'm going to leave two books in the library. One is called Letters from Young Activists, so you can identify with them better. And the other is the book, Who Runs Congress? When this came out years ago, it was the best-selling book on Congress ever, which isn't saying much. It didn't outsell one edition of Morris the Cat, but the idea is to find out who runs Congress so you learn how the people run Congress instead of 1,500 corporations and a few other interest groups that have too much power without adequate responsibility and skin in the game. I want to take just 30 more seconds and read you the list of Mahatma Gandhi's 7 deadly social sins. That's what he called it. 7 deadly social sins. And think of how many discussions can come from those 3 words per sin. He must have been the soundbite genius of the 20th century. 3 words per social sin. Think how much discussion. And think how revolutionary, in an intellectual sense, those 7 sins are. It's in this book that's out there called The Good Fight. Here they are. Politics without principle. Deadly social sin number 1. Social sin number 2, wealth without work. Social sin number 3, commerce without mortality. Social sin number 4, pleasure without conscience. Social sin number 5, education without character. Heraclitus once said, character is destiny. I would add also that personality is decisive, such as the civic personality. Number 6, science without humanity. Think of that. Think of the amount of science that goes into weapons of mass destruction, and we still have massive deaths by epidemics that could be stopped, not to mention other science for the people. Number 7, worship without sacrifice. Worship without sacrifice. I decided to add 2 more. Belief without thought. That comes from my father, who, when I was 10 years old, came home from school and he said to me, Ralph, what did you do today? Did you learn how to believe or did you learn how to think? That was worth a lot of credits to me. And the second is respect without self-respect. I have seen many wonderful students, very bright students, and there's another side to their life. It's called addiction. It's called personal coarseness. It's called masochism. The Ivy Leagues, I'm told from a recent report, binge drinking. Binge drinking. Why would anybody engage in binge drinking? What kind of insecurity is that? What lies under the surface that needs to be surfaced? In the early 1970s, I went around the colleges and I collected lecture fees. And I put them into young organizers who started public interest research groups, the PIRGs. How many of you ever heard of the PIRGs? Well, here in Pennsylvania, there would have been a wonderful PIRG funded by students, run by students, full-time people in their 20s that you would hire. There'd be lawyers and scientists and organizers and mobilizers and lobbyists so you can improve the state of Pennsylvania. 27,000 Penn State students signed a petition asking their regents to allow a $3 checkoff on the tuition bill to go to this nonprofit student group called Pennsylvania Public Interest Research Group. Right now there are 20 of them in 20 other states, such as New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. The Penn State regents, by law, were cut into 3 slices. A third had to be appointed by the governor, a third came from agribusiness, and a third came from industry. And when the final vote came whether to recognize this mass petition at Penn State and its branches, the ones appointed by the governor said yes. The ones appointed by the agribusiness and industry said no. And that finished it. It never was born. The lesson here is that the students at our universities and colleges have got to reassert themselves into a proper role of participation and power. It's not only that they're going to become alumni and be beseeched for support, it's that while you're at college is when you can start making a difference. You can start developing that critical connection between knowledge and action, and back to knowledge and back to action. It's when you can become a fuller human being and becoming a public citizen and not just a private individual. It's when you can look back on your life 50, 60, 70 years from now, and when someone asks you, what did you do about some of the major problems in the world? You can say something other than, I didn't do much because I was too busy updating my profile on Facebook. If you want to get a weekly column that elaborates this electronically free, and you don't have to put it on Facebook, just visit nader.org, sign up, and you'll get the column. I'm not just speaking to you today in order to lecture you. I'm speaking to you today because we need you. We need your idealism, we need your commitment, we need your energy, we need your future. Thank you.